Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is November 11. Today, as we continue in our daily Bible reading, we are continuing to walk with Jesus through the final week of his life here on this earth prior to his crucifixion. As we continue this journey with him, we're going to see in today's reading that we are on what some scholars believe would be Tuesday morning of his final week before the crucifixion. During this time, it should be no surprise to us that Jesus has a number of confrontations, verbal confrontations that is, with the religious leaders and the scribes of the day. These are the people who pride themselves on knowing the scriptures. These are the people who pride themselves on being the religious moral compass for the people, and yet they are the ones with whom Jesus continually has the most problem. Not because of their being able to know and understand the law, but because of their interpretation and application of it. Or maybe I should say lack of application of it. So as we begin today's reading, we begin with an unusual lesson that Jesus teaches from a fig tree. Now, we have seen Jesus on a previous occasion curse a fig tree because it was not producing, and the lesson seems obvious about being productive. But here, when Jesus had cursed the fig tree in yesterday's reading, we see today's reading starting out with the disciples noticing that that cursed fig tree has withered. And when they make some comment about it, or it's obvious that they've noticed it, Jesus uses it as an opportunity to talk about their faith, to talk about belief, how they themselves are capable of doing some powerful and amazing things if only they'll put their faith and their confidence in him. Jesus is then going to be questioned with regard to his authority by some of the religious leaders. The chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders come to him. By what authority are you doing these things? They asked. Jesus replied, I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. John's baptism, was it from heaven or from men? Tell me. They discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men, they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, we don't know. Jesus said, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. You can see how skillful Jesus is in turning the conversation right back upon his accusers. Jesus tells a parable about two sons. He says there's a father who told one of his sons to go work in the field, and the son responded, no, I will not, but later changed his mind and went to work in the field. The second son, the father tells to go work in the field, says, of course I will, but he never goes. And Jesus clearly is using this parable to talk about the way people are responding to him. Those that you wouldn't expect, like the tax collectors and the sinners and the harlots, they are the ones who seemingly said, no, I will not. But then they changed their mind and they are following Jesus. On the other hand, the religious leaders and the scribes and the teachers of the law seem to be portrayed by that son who says, of course I'll do whatever you say, and yet they never do it. So a very powerful, very sly parable, you might say, that Jesus tells with regard to the Pharisees and the religious leaders. He tells a parable against them, again, about murderous tenants in a vineyard, about a vineyard owner who leases out his vineyard to those who would work for him. He's built this nice vineyard and a watchtower, and all this he gives to some farmers, and he goes away on a journey. And when it comes time for the harvest, he sends back someone to get his part of the harvest, and that person is abused, and another servant is sent, and finally they abuse these servants, and ultimately he sends his son who is killed. It's very clearly an indication that these people to whom Jesus is speaking, the religious leaders, are represented by those farmers of that vineyard that have been given some responsibility, yet have shirked their responsibility and have destroyed prophets, and now are on the verge of destroying the Son of God himself. Jesus claims him to be that rejected stone, that cornerstone about which the prophets had prophesied. And then the religious leaders are literally spoken of as being amazed. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard Jesus' parables, they knew he was talking about them. They looked for a way to arrest him, but they were afraid of the crowd because the people held that he was a prophet. The people are the ones that are truly amazed at Jesus' teaching and his handling of these religious leaders, but it just infuriates them because they know he is talking about them. So Jesus tells the parable of a wedding banquet. And this king is going to give a banquet for his son, but as he goes out to get those invitees to come and telling them that the banquet is ready, one by one they make excuses. And so finally he says to his servants, go invite anyone who will come. But even then, a wedding garment is required. And so Jesus, again, continues to teach with parables. The leaders are going to ask Jesus about taxes. These spies are sent to him and they question him, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Notice how they kind of butter him up. Oh, we know that you are truthful. Oh, we know that you are right. Now tell us, is it right for us to pay taxes? You see, they're cleverly trying to ensnare Jesus in something he might say. He sees through their duplicity and says to them, show me a denarius. Whose portrait is on it? Whose inscription is on it? He asks. Caesar's, they reply. And he says to them, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God. They were unable to trap him in what he said there in public, and astonished by his answer, they became silent. That's really the only response they can have to Jesus, isn't it? They become silent. He has wowed them with his understanding not only of the scriptures, but his understanding of how to have a conversation in which he's being accused. The Sadducees, who are not even believers in the resurrection, concoct this amazing story and try to trap Jesus in what he says and what he believes about the resurrection, to which Jesus responds by saying, the resurrection is not going to be like life on this earth. Even though they've concocted this story about a woman who's had a husband who died and all of his brothers who died, Jesus says it's not going to be like that in the resurrection. We are not going to have marriage or people being given in marriage. And so you just show that you don't understand the resurrection. And again, they were unsuccessful in trying to trap him. There's a lawyer who comes to Jesus and asks him, what is the greatest commandment? It's a great question. Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And this lawyer seemingly understands. He says, that makes sense. To love God with all of your heart certainly does make sense. And then to love one's neighbor as oneself is more important, really, than all the sacrifices and offerings of the old way. And Jesus says to him, you're not far from the kingdom of heaven. He's saying to him, you're on the right track. You're understanding that this kingdom is based on love for the Father and love for people. Jesus wows the people continually with his teaching, and then he turns his statements, his comments against the Pharisees and says some pretty pointed things about them. Jesus said to the crowds and to the disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees who sit in Moses' seat he says they're really proud of themselves. But watch this. He says, so you must obey them and do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for men to see. And then he turns to those Pharisees and he condemns their self-righteousness. He condemns their false religion. He condemns their legalistic tendencies, their injustices, their hypocrisy, the way they persecute people. And finally, Jesus, we read again, laments over Jerusalem because so many people have missed the point of his being there with them. And then finally, today's reading closes with Jesus honoring a widow who has not given much financially in the temple, but she has given everything she has. Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.